Imagine building your dream private hangar at a small airport, only to have a power-hungry HOA seize it overnight. But what happens when the guy they targeted owns the runway itself? They grounded his dreams, so he grounded their flights. If you love stories about petty HOAs, entitled neighbors and sweet revenge, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more wild property drama. Let S dive into this insane tale of an HOA that bit off way more than it could chew. The small airport on the outskirts of Willow Creek was a haven for aviation enthusiasts, a quiet strip of asphalt surrounded by rolling fields and a tight-knit community of pilots. At the heart of this story was Ethan Caldwell, a retired Air Force pilot turned entrepreneur, who had poured his life savings into a gleaming private hangar at the airport. The hangar was his pride and joy, a steel and glass masterpiece housing his cherished Cessna 172, meticulously maintained and ready for weekend flights. Ethan wasn't just a pilot. He was a visionary who had quietly acquired the land beneath the airport's runway years ago, a little-known fact that gave him unique leverage in the community. The airport operated under a cooperative agreement, with a small HOA-like board managing shared facilities, maintenance, and fees. Ethan kept to himself, paying his dues and maintaining his hangar, but trouble was brewing in the form of the Willow Creek Aviation Association, a self-important group led by Marjorie Henshaw, a woman whose need for control rivaled her love for nitpicking regulations. Marjorie, a retired real estate agent with a penchant for power, had turned the association into her personal fiefdom, wielding bylaws like a scepter. She had long-eyed Ethan's hangar with envy, not because she flew, but because its sleek design and prime location made her own leased storage unit look pitiful by comparison. The association's rules were vague, deliberately so, allowing Marjorie to interpret them as she saw fit. Ethan's hangar, she decided, was too ostentatious, a violation of some unwritten aesthetic code. Without warning, she pushed through a vote to seize his hangar for community use, claiming it would better serve as a shared maintenance hub. Ethan received a curt letter informing him that his hangar was no longer his, effective immediately, and his plane would be relocated to an open lot. The locks were changed overnight, and his access card was deactivated. Ethan stood outside his own hangar, staring at the gleaming structure he'd built, now guarded by a security company hired by Marjorie. Anger simmered, but Ethan wasn't one to act rashly. He knew something Marjorie didn't. The runway, the very lifeline of the airport, was his property. Years ago, when the airport was struggling, Ethan had purchased the land to keep it operational, leasing it back to the association for a nominal fee. The agreement was buried in old paperwork, overlooked by Marjorie and her cronies. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities, but he chose patience, gathering evidence and consulting his lawyer. The association, meanwhile, reveled in their victory, with Marjorie parading around the airport inspecting her new maintenance hub. Pilots grumbled, but few dared challenge her. Ethan, however, was already plotting a move that would turn the tables. He spent days reviewing the lease agreement, confirming his ownership of the runway, and drafting a plan. The association's actions had violated the terms of the lease, giving him grounds to act. He decided to bide his time, letting Marjorie's arrogance grow. The airport buzzed with tension as pilots noticed Ethan's absence, whispering about the injustice. Marjorie, oblivious to the storm brewing, planned a grand opening for the repurposed hangar, inviting local media to showcase her leadership. Ethan watched from a distance, his calm demeanor hiding the fire within. He knew the perfect moment to strike was coming, and when it did, the association would regret crossing him. Ethan's next move was calculated and precise. He sent a formal letter to the Willow Creek Aviation Association, citing the lease agreement and demanding the immediate return of his hangar. The letter was polite but firm, outlining the consequences of non-compliance, termination of the runway lease. Marjorie scoffed at the threat, dismissing it as a bluff during an emergency board meeting. She convinced the board that Ethan was powerless. a lone pilot against their collective authority. The association doubled down, issuing a public statement accusing Ethan of violating community standards and justifying the seizure. This was the mistake Ethan had been waiting for. He filed a legal notice to terminate the Runway lease, effective in 30 days, as per the contract's terms. The notice was delivered to every board member, and word spread like wildfire among the pilots. The runway was the airport's lifeblood. Without it, no flights could operate. Panic set in as pilots realized their planes would be grounded. Marjorie, still defiant, rallied her supporters, claiming Ethan's ownership was a technicality that could be overturned in court. She hired a lawyer, draining the association's funds, and pushed for a countersuit, accusing Ethan of extortion. Meanwhile, Ethan quietly met with other pilots, sharing the truth about his ownership and the association's overreach. Many, fed up with Marjorie's tyranny, began to side with him. The airport became a battleground of loyalties, with Marjorie's allies clinging to her promises of victory and others questioning her leadership. Ethan's lawyer uncovered more dirt. Marjorie had misappropriated association funds for personal expenses, including the security company guarding his hangar. This revelation eroded her support further. As the 30-day deadline approached, the association scrambled to negotiate, but Ethan held firm. He wasn't just fighting for his hangar, he was dismantling a corrupt system. Marjorie's grand opening for the hangar went ahead, but it was a fiasco. Only a handful of supporters showed up, and the media caught wind of the runway dispute, turning the event into a public relations disaster. Pilots began moving their planes to nearby airports, unwilling to risk being grounded. Ethan, meanwhile, prepared for the next phase, knowing the association's desperation would force their hand. The airport, once a vibrant hub, grew eerily quiet, with empty hangars and a runway on borrowed time. Marjorie's grip on power was slipping, and Ethan was ready to deliver the final blow. The 30-day deadline arrived, and Ethan exercised his right to terminate the runway lease. Overnight, the airport was effectively shut down. No planes could take off or land without his permission, as the runway was now private property. Pilots were furious, not at Ethan, but at the association for provoking him. Marjorie's countersuit collapsed when her lawyer discovered the lease was airtight, leaving the association with no legal recourse. Ethan's hangar remained locked, but he didn't need access to win. He controlled the runway, and that was enough. The association called an emergency meeting, begging Ethan to negotiate. He agreed to meet, but on his terms, the hangar returned, Marjorie removed from the board, and a full audit of the association's finances. Marjorie, cornered, tried to rally her remaining allies, but they abandoned her, unwilling to risk their own flying privileges. The board voted to comply with Ethan's demands, returning his hangar and ousting Marjorie. The audit revealed her financial misconduct, leading to her resignation in disgrace. Ethan, now back in his hangar, began drafting a new cooperative agreement for the airport, one that prioritized transparency and fairness. Pilots returned, grateful for his stand against the association's overreach. The runway lease was reinstated, but under stricter terms, ensuring no future board could abuse its power. Ethan's Cessna took to the skies again, a symbol of his victory. The airport slowly regained its vibrancy, but the scars of the conflict remained, a reminder of what happens when petty tyrants push too far. Ethan emerged as a quiet hero, his ownership of the runway a trump card that had grounded not just flights, but an entire corrupt regime. Thanks for diving into this wild HOA drama. If you enjoyed Ethan's epic takedown, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for more crazy property stories. Drop a comment with your own HOA nightmares. We'd love to hear them. Stay tuned for the next saga.